Okay, I think we've got critical mass, so let's get started. Um, Welcome everyone. Morning. Apologies for the early start on the West Coast. And John's taking some leave, so you're afraid you're stuck with me today. So for those of you that haven't been to one of these before, this is a fifth in a series of sessions we're doing, gathering feedback. From the field to pull together a response for the administration and for Congress on the administration's ambitions to expand apprenticeships. And today we're going to talk about artificial intelligence. There's a big focus, there's a whole executive order on AI education and a big focus on apprenticeships within that. So Denise, can you pull up the slide when you get a chance, please? So format wise, we're gonna keep it pretty similar to how we've run the other sessions. We'll do a brief bit of context setting up front, where I'll talk about what's actually in the executive orders, what are the big kind of topics for debate. And then we're going to bring in our friends and partners who really know their stuff on AI and apprenticeship. So we've got Ashwin Barath and Mike Roberts and Rick Ray. And then we'll open up for reflections, comments, questions, feedback. Please put anything in the chat as we go along, or about 20 minutes, half an hour in, we'll open up. Please put your hand up to make a comment or ask a question. As usual, we're recording this and we'll share the recording round afterwards. We'll put it on our YouTube channel. And we'll also turn off the recording and stick around after the call for 15, 20 minutes in case anyone has anything they want to discuss off the record. Great. So let's get into it. So Denise, can we go to the third slide, please? So I'm just going to quickly cover what the executive orders say on AI and apprenticeship. So this is from the AI education executive order. The overall message for us is there's a call for increasing participation in AI related apprenticeship. That's going to be a big topic for us to discuss today. What exactly does an AI related occupation mean? Is this about people working directly on AI, or is it about a slightly broader category? And then the executive order's got some indication about how DOL should think about going about increasing participation here. There's a nod to using intermediary contacts and discretionary funding to do it, which is quite light on detail, I think, which gives us an opportunity to suggest what will be sensible approaches here, based on the last few years of our experience, what could help move the dial. There's a nod to establishing specific goals for growing apprenticeships in these occupations. This is interesting. So we've had some federal kind of targeting for growth of particular occupations before, notably in teaching and nursing. Some states have looked at setting targets for specific occupations. So it's something that Maryland recommended in their legislative report, growing apprenticeships. So yeah, we think that could be an interesting approach. And finally, there's this point asking DOL to support the creation of industry developed standards registered on a nationwide basis, enabling individual employers to adopt the standards without requiring individual registry. We covered this a few weeks ago in our session on national standards and on guidelines. Our understanding is this isn't a way to bypass registration. It's about finding ways for multi-employer intermediaries to operate at scale across multiple employers. So overall, I mean, there's a lot for us to get into on AI apprenticeships specifically. We also think this might be indicative of the more detailed approach that the administration might want to take on growing apprenticeships. It gets into a bit more detail than the broader executive order. So we think this could be a bit of a test case on the approach for expansion that they could develop in AI and then apply elsewhere. So a specific AI interest, but more also a broader interest for us. On to the next slide. So this just gives a bit of broader context on what the rest of this executive order on AI education says. I'm not going to go through all the detail here, but I think the the sort of broader point for us is there's kind of two sides to this. So there's a how do we educate people on AI skills side, and then there's also a how do we use AI directly in education to improve delivery. So we think there's an opportunity for us to think about that as a field in apprenticeships. How are there ways we can enable delivery, enable practice by adopting AI that we should think about. That's probably less an area where there's an ask for federal support. That that's something that the programs can already do, but it's definitely a topic we can think about as well. Uh, Great. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in our real experts on this, Ashwin, Mike, and Rick. Denise, do you mind pulling the slides down and then getting the spotlight on our panelists, please? Great. Thank you. Cool. So we're going to start with some introductions. Ashwin, I'm gonna start with you. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and your background and your involvement with AI in apprenticeships?
Love to. First of all, thank you, Harry. I'm very excited to be here. Before I jump into my background, I have to tell you, what Apprenticeship for America is doing is an absolutely great service, and I have to tell you, you are determined and relentless on what you want. Keep fighting. I'm really, really happy for that. Now, coming to me, Harry, Ashwin Bharat, I call myself as a technologist who is lucky to build two companies. So I am not new to AI. My first AI project was in 2001, and it's still in use. Did it for General Motors. The vehicle comparator that you see in General Motors is something that me and my team built in 2001. And then throughout halfway through the journey, I was founder of the company called Revature. And as you know, Revature is one of the leading technology training career path for entry-level programmers in the country. We have done it for over 30,000 young men and women in this process. Excited for it. For the last 1 year, what I have been doing is with all this AI hype, I started getting into AI in 2002 just to understand that it's a hype. It's not like something real, but I was really scared by its potential. Because the first project I did just had 27 parameters. Today we are talking about trillions of parameters. I can't even imagine its capacity. I call it as like million Einstein brains embedded in one, and you have access to it for $20 a month. That's how I call it. That fascinated me. I decided to leave Revature and acquired an AI company. Now I'm running it. So that's a quick background of me. And thank you once again, Harry, for having me.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ashwin. It's great to have you here. Mike, I'm gonna get to you next.
Sure. So I like to say that I am a technologist building the playbook for earn and learn pathways. I've been writing software for nearly 4 decades. Left the job as a principal software engineer to go work at an immersive coding boot camp to try and change what I was seeing, which was not a lot of people that looked like me in any of the rooms that I was in. I then sort of started my own program, which founded Creating Coding Careers, which today is a nonprofit, high intervention intermediary. In many cases, we've been employer of record. We've taken some really bold risks to advance apprenticeships, and now we're working in the apprenticeship degree space. In terms of AI, I sort of thought this is like absurd a few years ago, and then when we started to kind of see ChatGPT and then a real arms race now, I dove in and have been building lots of projects and using AI in my day to day as much as I can to really understand its limits, but also the potential. And so happy to talk more in this conversation about where I think we're headed. But yeah, that's a little bit of my background.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Great to have you here. And last but not least, over to you, Rick.
Hi, yeah, I'm Rick Rafey. I'm in Silicon Valley. I actually work with Mike at Creating Coding Careers. I have been in technology in the Valley for decades. I actually grew up in DC, so I have an attachment to policy as well. So I've been working with Harry and the AFA team and people in California, thought leaders around policy. But my day job is working with Mike and Creating Coding Careers, and every conversation we have around apprenticeships, because we're focused on tech roles, has AI come up as a topic for the last year. And what I think is especially interesting is that there's this fear. I mean, in the workforce side of things, especially, there's a giant fear of AI. And what I think this executive order, if it comes to pass in a meaningful way with funding, et cetera, it makes that fear actionable. And suddenly all these people who are, feeling as victims of it, or, um, in the sights of what this could revolutionize, can actually be empowered if they are given the right knowledge and in the right context, to actually make it a force for good and productivity. And so I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Brilliant. Thanks, Rick. I want to kick us off with an open question. Feel free, any of you, to jump in. Firstly, why are we talking about this? Why are we talking about AI and apprenticeship together? What's the relevance of the apprenticeship model to this broader conversation we're having on AI?
It's okay, Harry, I can start with that. And it's a good question. I think the right way to start with it. See, why it is apprenticeship is the problem. I would not say the problem. I think what we are trying to solve with AI is something new and which we have not experienced as like human beings ever, right? So it has to have a different approach. I'd like to give you an example. So this is the number one learning content provider company in the world. I'm not going to name it. They was questioned by their clients that like they adapted the self-learners is very limited. There's a single-digit percentage. That's the most common way of upskilling. How do we increase that? So the CEO took a challenge, created a state-of-the-art 20 minutes course, and mandated his own employees to take that course. Right, in 60 days, only 60% of them did it after several things. So the current approach that we have to give any kind of skills, upskilling or new skills, is self-learning. That's not going to work. This is a new approach. So we need to have a different one. And thinking of many areas, I believe apprenticeship is a perfect one, because it's hands-on learning, it's extremely employer involved, and it's also an outcome-based one. I think it has to be that. I'll tell you one more point why apprenticeship is even more important, which is jobs in the world of AI. I saw you mentioned about AI occupation. See, to me, that's an abstract term. It's also a philosophy. I'll tell you how that is going to change. Today's job, as we are doing, is heterogeneous in having multiple skill set. What I mean that is to do a job, you need to have multiple skill set, but homogeneous in terms of job functions or job roles. In the world of AI, in AI occupancy, that's going to become heterogeneous in terms of job functions. One individual will be doing multiple job functions because AI is going to break the barrier and collapse these multiple roles into one. That's the new way of working. This can be achieved only by practical hands-on learning. You learn, you apply, you do things, and that's the only way. An apprenticeship is a perfect vehicle for it.
Thanks, Ashwin. So a greater need for that direct hands-on learning, and increasing change in job roles. Mike, do you want to add to
Sure. I think I think we all recognize that we are currently in this gold rush phase for AI, right? And so there's this lack of clarity around specific skills, knowledge, competencies. And as Ashwin mentioned, once you start applying the apprenticeship pattern, it starts to bring a little bit more organization. I like to say that right now there's a strong need for maps. If we think about this as a gold rush, and everybody's sort of racing around for picks and axes, but the reality is that we need to start figuring out sort of how do we deal with this unprecedented pace of change, right? And it's AI in general is moving exponentially faster than anything we've seen before in terms of previous technology shifts. And so we've never had to adapt and assess skills at this pace. And this demands a velocity of response that I feel like, as Ashwin said, all of the components of apprenticeship embrace.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mike. And I want to touch on something that Rick, I think you mentioned in your intro a little bit, and Mike, you were just talking about this pace of change. It's quite scary, right? There's a lot of fear mongering about AI, both in the kind of education world and in the kind of what it means to the labor market and more existentially. What about us in apprenticeships? You know, should we be worried about this change? Is this a challenge to be worried about, or is this an opportunity for apprenticeships?
So I'm going to jump in and just say this is absolutely an opportunity. I mean, what we have right now is the definition of a fast pace of job and skills attainment, and it's moving faster than traditional institutions can handle. And one thing that's been really exciting about working with creating coding careers is just seeing how agile and nimble and how we can create a program and customize it exactly to a job category. And that's just not the way traditional education has worked, except in like the CTE area. And we're also looking at CTE, and we're looking at another, for the tech field, we're looking at a concept of apprenticeship degrees where people can actually not just learn on the job and learn swiftly in that way, but can actually get credit for that. Just like dual enrollment between high school and college, it would be between potentially college and the job. And I think that's a revolutionary concept that's taken off in your home country, Harry, and in other parts of the world. And I feel like that makes it a lot more palatable, at least in the tech sector, but I think more generally because it also applies to education, where you were saying that these changes are going forward. And so to me, the apprenticeship model is a perfect foundation, and these kinds of evolutions make it something that people will embrace. And it's a beautiful bipartisan policy. People love apprenticeships. It's like 87%, I think, across parties like apprenticeships. They just don't know how to put them in place.
Thanks, Rick. Agreed.
I can add to one of the things, because I saw an interesting question in the chat. See, as Rick said, it's a really exciting opportunity, and probably, in my opinion, that's the only practically viable opportunity that exists now, unless employers adapt like really extensive and serious on-the-job training, right? Which is going to be tough. See, for me, like why apprenticeship is very essential is it is not just, somebody asked, is it because of the speed of change? The answer is yes, but more importantly, the unknown, you have known unknowns in AI, and you have many unknown unknowns in AI. And it is not possible for you to create a perfect career path to do it, like a self-learning path. So apprenticeship, those unknown unknowns can be unlocked by doing it, by learning and having practical explanation. So especially in this transitionary phase of AI, apprenticeship is a perfect practical solution.
Thanks, Ashwin. So just to paraphrase you both, the pace of change means that apprenticeships is the right solution, and we as AFA often talk about apprenticeships as, you know, de-risking that transition into the labour market. I think that's what you're getting at there, Ashwin, where, you know, we've got a lot of unknowns with AI. If you've got, you know, an apprenticeship with employer directed training, you're getting rid of a few of those unknowns at least. I want to move on and talk about the specifics in the executive order. So firstly, let's try and tackle this occupation question. And I think we've got a comment in the sidebar that asks it quite nicely. Are there AI jobs or AI enablement of many jobs, or both? So yeah, what is it we mean by these AI related occupations? Is this a small subset? Is this all occupations? What are your thoughts on this?
So I guess I'll start by saying that I think AI is going to have, even just within the direct AI occupations, maybe two broad categories, one of tool makers and one of tool users, folks that are going to be applying patterns and techniques to help all businesses improve. But beyond those two, like, very distinct roles that are going to be called lots of different things and have very different facets to them, I do also believe that AI is going to be a cross-cutting, a skill that's going to be necessary across a lot of other occupations. And, how do you tie together those transferable skills that are going to help it advance lots of different occupations? One of the things I try and think about myself as I'm, thinking about like people making predictions about AI. Instead of predicting the future jobs, I think it's really about building resilience and strategies to be able to adapt when change happens and when we're leveraging AI and when we're seeing these novel use cases being applied. And so this is really just a fundamental shift in our thought process. So I think it's a occupations and a yes and to how we can also bring it into other areas where it's going to advance lots and lots of industries. It's unpredictable number of industries that will be touched.
And I'd like to build on what Mike was saying. I think that's exactly right. That division and also and opportunity, and also Anthropic actually put out a really interesting economic analysis, and specifically looking at software engineers as almost a harbinger for what's going to be happening in the broader market. And they do this data analysis on essentially automation versus augmentation, where automation is basically turning the job over to AI, whereas augmentation is empowering the people to be better at their jobs. And in software engineering, a lot more people, like by a stark number, are using it more for automation, and there are natural reasons for doing that. But the theory is that that's going to apply to a lot of jobs over time. And where we're looking at careers and workforce, we want some element of automation, obviously, but augmentation is where the people are really coming into the mix. And so by this executive order, I think what we're doing is we're enabling people to understand how they can be most effectively augmented with these tools. And I think that's going to change the workforce considerably. And certainly knowing how to do that, one of the great quotes I heard is, AI is not going to take your job, but somebody knows how to use AI is going to take your job, or could take your job. And so I'm advocating for people in all kinds of fields, not just the people who I know from tech, to figure out how AI can make their jobs better. And then they'll be the people who are still around in those places and the change agents there, as opposed to, looking for their next job.
And so it looks like me and Rick, we both are reading the same thing. So I did find that one, and so I'll add some statistic related to what just Rick said. So this is directly coming from a Stanford professor. So in terms of AI tool makers, to quote Mike, in terms of like hardcore AI tools like OpenAI, Anthropic Cloud, and things like that, you just need 50,000 people worldwide to do that. Then there are like other AI tool makers, ancillary AI tools. This is not like hardcore AI tools, but like these are using those hardcore tools, they create other AI tools that you just need 2 million worldwide. That's it. That's all you need. But in terms of other AI augmented jobs, if you take ONET's job classification, zone 1 to zone 5, every jobs in zone 2, 3, and 4 will be infused by AI. That's roughly 120 million workforce in US. And they have to be adapters and great users of AI. I think that is how it is going to be. And that's what we should be talking about in apprenticeship. And how this job will change, again, to quote the Anthropic paper. So that original theory came from this gentleman, Eric Brilhoffen. He's an AI professor in Stanford. He wrote this book, Second Machine Age, and which I believe is his thesis. Every job that we do have multiple subroutines. So we do many things in a particular job. It can be categorized into 4 different categories. One is automated, that's gone. AI is going to automate it, we don't need it. The second category of subroutine is augmented. We talked about it. There are 2 more. The third one is important. I think that's where the biggest change in apprenticeship is going to come in, which is commoditized. You don't need a specialist skilled worker to do that thing. Anybody can do it. In the world of coding, nearly 25% of the job that is done by a programmer need not be done by a programmer. It's a specialist job that can be done by an analyst, or can be done by a business user or someone else. So there's a significant amount of these subroutines in a job can also be commoditized. That's the third category. And the last category is human beings still have to do it. So this is how these zone 2, 3, and 4 jobs will be further categorized into these subroutines. And as employees or policymakers, we should know which one has the highest impact. What's the highest exposure score of these job roles, and that's how things should be changed.
So to pull that together, I think we've got a nice consensus there. We've got a group of tool makers working directly on AI, probably, you know, a bit not a huge part of the labor market. We then have a group of tool users working with AI. That is what, maybe 80% of the labor market, we think. I want to bring in some of the discussion in the sidebar on perhaps a third category we need to think about, which is Shonda's question about the broader impact that AI will have on construction. We're going to have a greater demand for data centers, power. Any of you got any views on those kind of knock-on effects, you know, sort of more indirect effects that we might see, and what that might mean for training needs?
Well, a lot of people talk about apprenticeships in the trades and in construction in particular. And Ryan Craig just put something out a week or so ago specifically about housing and the lack of people in construction, and that's part of why building houses and construction in general have gotten very expensive. Construction is a huge part of the apprenticeship movement. We're all focused on the more modern apprenticeships that are more in the sort of 1 year time frame, whereas your construction apprenticeships are more in the 4-year time frame. But data centers are, you know, absolutely a huge part of what's being built right now, and they're jobs for the people who are building those data centers. They're jobs for the electrical engineers that are actually making sure all the technology is what it needs to be and working properly. And then there's a software component to it as well. And so data centers have their own, you know, baggage as far as, you know, different communities. Santa Clara just put a moratorium where I live on any more, and there are like 40 of them in a pretty small city because we have our own electric company. But we've definitely talked to people who that's their focus is data centers, because that's a boom area and certainly ripe for apprenticeships on sort of all levels.
And I guess I'll just add that what I'm seeing is that a lot of these larger organizations are bringing this sort of like in-house, right? And so I can't remember if it was Google or maybe it was Amazon that mentioned that they are one of the largest employers of like electricians. And I was like, how can that be? And they're just like, well, we use our own inside of data centers. We don't sort of like farm that work out to contractors. And so I think for those that are advocates for apprenticeships, what that means is we're now going to have exposure inside of organizations that traditionally may not have thought about apprenticeship as a pattern, and they'll inherit this as they bring some of these traditional trades in under the roof. There'll also be in areas like some of them are starting to look at nuclear facilities, right? And so now you may have, you know, nuclear engineering apprenticeship programs that could be on the horizon, because we're looking at all of these different new and innovative ways of applying apprenticeship to these in-demand type roles that again are very, you know, non-traditional. So I think that it bodes well that we have this need for data centers, energy. I'm a optimist in that I think we're very close to energy abundance, and so I'm tending to kind of see a great wave of, you know, clean technology and clean energy. It seems really close, and I feel like AI may expedite the process of us getting there. But yeah, it's kind of how I see the more traditional blending with these things that are sort of driven by the pace of AI.
That's a great point, Mike. We're gonna hopefully have, you know, these maybe non-traditional apprenticeship employers, because of the demand for construction, enter into, you know, a field with more apprenticeship saturation. I'm going to ask you guys a few more questions and then start bringing other people in for comments and questions. So please start putting your hands up, and then we can pick up some of the conversation in the sidebar as well. But first, back to the executive order. So, you know, we have this ask for a plan to expand apprenticeships in AI-related occupations. just thinking about this expansion, what does this look like? What are the factors we need to put in place to grow apprenticeships in the kinds of occupations that we're talking about?
Funding. We'll start there. And so again, in any effort that we try and undertake that's new, I think always about sharpening the saw, right? Before we start cutting, we want to make sure that we've got all of the tools and the pieces in place. I think the two biggest ones are going to be clarifying and consolidating the funding pathways, which right now are just very fractured. I think anybody doing apprenticeship work understands we've got all these different sources of funding that right now have to be braided very carefully instead of there just being larger pools of performance-based formula funding, all those kinds of things that we've all sort of been talking about within this community. And I think the second aspect is really thinking about how do we market apprenticeship solutions to companies? How do we sell apprenticeship? Because that's the second factor to make a big positive change. Folks need to be aware that this solution exists. And so we need to be thinking about how can we break through and communicate this in a way where it seems less intimidating to folks. Often when they hear like, oh, I've got to work with the Department of Labor, immediately their guard goes up and you've got all kinds of internal stakeholders that you've got to convince that no, this can be done. We have intermediaries. They're going to help you through this process. It's going to be made easy. I think people just think it's a lot more challenging than it is. So a lot of this is like, we need almost like a Madison Avenue big campaign around that this can be done. This is easy to do with intermediaries, and make sure businesses are aware that the solution exists. Then everything else will be easier after that. Once we get, a real demand from companies, at least for like more information about apprenticeships so that we can take it to our team, explore if it's the right fit, etc.
Yeah, I was actually just listening to something on the radio yesterday about the growth of college post World War II, and things like the GI Bill were a huge factor in that. And then the space race in the 60s just also made a massive impact. The amount of money that was coming into the universities at that time was just insane, including, places, California, Alabama, all over the place, to bolster the workforce and really meet a national priority. And that's where we are here with this executive order. And so the difference now is that while we've absolutely stepped up the amount of money that goes to education until potentially this last few months, Ryan Craig will also point out that there's 1,000-to-1 disparity between college programs and apprenticeship programs in terms of investment in this country. And what we're talking about right now is how applicable this is to that fast-paced need. And so just shifting the balance and things like this executive order paired with the other executive order around apprenticeships that we've talked about before is exactly the right note for the administration to be taking. The question is just, how does this translate into real dollars? Because the obvious reaction on the heels of these executive orders was that funding was cut for workforce. And ultimately, I think, Harry, you were the one in one of the earlier meetings or webinars was talking about paying for training and making that, and not so much paying wages for the workers, but actually paying for the training. Because right now, industry is counting on college to do a lot of the training, and then they absorb what they can, but they want people with experience, so they don't have to pay for that. But the role for government in actually funding that training is similar to what it was in the GI Bill and similar to what it was in the space race. And I think if we can get that perception into the DoD and the people who are starting to fund these initiatives, the NSF, then I think there's really great opportunity for the funding that all these intermediaries can use to grease that path for the companies that currently aren't ready to take that step.
And on the funding, I just want to clarify, like if I had the magic wand to wave, the type of funding that I would be looking for would be direct incentives for employers very similar to the types of incentives we rolled out during COVID. So for folks that, I'm sure you've seen commercials on TV about this ERC tax credit, if you retained employees throughout COVID, it was roughly $27,000 per employee. And if we could get that kind of investment in helping companies adopt apprenticeship, even if we taper it off after the first few years, everybody sees how successful it is, they love doing it, then maybe you don't have to incentivize them as much with funding because they're starting to see the ROI. But those are the kinds of numbers that we're talking about. And for folks that are, maybe have not looked at what federal funding looks like in general, it's about 1,000, maybe as much as a couple $1,000s on a per participant basis of incentive funding that's available to employers. So that's a vast difference in like how you can, attract their attention and get them motivated to consider something. When you talk about what we did with COVID and you compare it what we've historically done with apprenticeships, like there's just the comparison is it's vastly different, right?
I will add one more thing. So on top of funding, which is very important, I think we should also expand apprenticeship program. So currently apprenticeship is predominantly for trade jobs. I think we should have expand it for knowledge jobs too, like operational jobs, administrative jobs, clerical jobs, programming. It should be expanded. But the biggest expansion, in my opinion, it should be is to all three categories of like career beginners, career changes, and career advances in the same manner. I'll start with career beginners. Especially, I have a son who's a junior in high school, so I'm actively involved in what major he's going to take because ultimately it's going to be his career path. And he's doing it, his friends are doing it. I can tell with, sadly, I can tell with the fact that most of these majors that they're doing, the career path that they choose will not exist when they graduate. It's not going to exist. That's the reality, and it has never happened. So the current high school students and also the who are in college now, at the early stage, they are going to graduate, and the career path they choose is not going to exist. So how do we manage that? What are we doing for apprenticeship program? And we should focus on new AI jobs that will be created for them, and apprenticeship should be focused on it. I think that's very important. And it's real. Anthropic CEO said 50% of the current white-collar entry-level jobs can be done by AI agents. That's scary. He just told us last week, right? And this generation is going to have a problem. The second one is career changes. Until now, career changes are by their own choice. Moving forward, it is going to be a forced career change because a lot of these jobs is going to go through some radical change. And especially some demographics. For example, UN just came with a report last week. 41% of the jobs held by women will be impacted by AI compared to 28% of the job held by men. That's a big change. So the career changes, apprenticeship should be expanded and should be offered for employers. Hey, I know that this is a new job that is coming in, but this existing workforce might not have the skills. These are the apprenticeship models that you have that you can use for these career changes. I think that should be serious. And the last one is career advances. So I think apprenticeship should be expanded, to summarize, to non-trade skills and also to all three categories of job seekers.
Brilliant. It's almost like you guys have been reading the AFA script. So I think there's 4 things that came up there. 1, funding needs to be predictable, sustained, per apprenticeship basis, direct incentives for employers. 2, growth of intermediaries to do the work. 3, expansion into new occupations, non-traditional occupations. And lastly, communication and marketing. We need a big marketing effort to reach those employers. I'm going to ask one more question and then start bringing people up. So please start putting your hands up. And I might pick on a few people in the sidebar to come in as well, because there's a lot of debate going on there. So I wanted to ask a question about, the broader education piece here. So that, the executive order's got a small part on apprenticeships, a lot on education more broadly, and we're a small part of a broader picture. I wanted to ask you guys for your views on what you're seeing out there. How is education more broadly beyond apprenticeships changing with AI?
Well, I was on a panel or at a webinar a week or so ago where somebody was pointing out that because of the fear of cheating in universities and plagiarism, that they're actually going back to blue books in some cases, which for you, Harry, is the when you have to handwrite it because you don't have any digital tool to use it, so there's no chance that you're using AI to answer the exam questions. And it was interesting listening to the reaction in the room because it's mostly educators, and it was almost like, this is what we need to do now. Like we can't, this isn't the long-term plan, but we're not braced for this. And so I feel like it's back to the actionable fear. My son's a professor at UCLA, and they have to mine how much of the actual material that they're being given by their students or grant proposal is just coming from AI versus their own original thought. And it's just really shaking up academic institutions. And so I believe that the more we empower these people in the same way I was describing earlier, the actionable fear, like understanding how to harness it. And that's actually one thing I really quite admire about the executive order is teacher training. I work here with a group in Silicon Valley that specifically has an AI training initiative. They're one of the most revered programs in the country for teacher training. So it's a blessing that the work they're doing that they've been scrambling around trying to find funding for is suddenly on the national agenda. And I think there's no shortage of room for people to figure out the best ways to apply that and start sharing those practices around colleges and K through 12.
See, again, I'm not an expert in education, Harry, but for me, I think it's a little unfair to ask educators to take the load on AI-related changes. The reason is higher education is not designed for rapid changes. What we're experiencing in AI is hyper rapid change, not just rapid change, right? So I think it's a little unfair to do it. I think obviously a lot of things has to be changed. See, we are, before we get into the age of artificial intelligence, we will go through a phase of artificial humans. That's what is going to be the job changer or job killer. Higher education cannot be a big change catalyst in that phase. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just sort of reiterate that my belief is that all the folks within higher ed are fine folks. The skill set required in the current market to address the demand for companies is moving much more rapidly than they are even empowered to do so. There's, for example, the education sector, particularly around community colleges, they operate in much larger and longer time scales than what we see with small to mid-sized companies or large enterprise, right? I mean, it takes 2 years to get a curriculum approved. And so when folks say, oh, we're working on AI curriculum, and I'm thinking like, I have no idea what AI is going to look like in 2 years. How could you know what AI is going to look like in 2 years to be developing curriculum? So you're going to need to shorten your cycle and take a much more agile approach. For those that maybe have heard that term but don't quite know what it means, it's really delivering something to your customer really quickly and then taking the customer feedback and iterating on it and constantly improving the quality of the product. We just don't have an educational system that's designed that way, that's designed to be agile and be as responsive as organizations like Ashwin has led. And so until we start to figure out how to combine that to our traditional academic institutions and cycles, they're going to fall behind very quickly. And one of the challenges for them is to justify the cost of education. They're trying to also justify what changes need to be made to increase their enrollment numbers. And so again, I feel like it would be really wise, and I think a lot of the leading institutions are looking more at competency-based types of programs. And so you think of leaders in the space like WGU that have been thinking about how do we move quickly and at the pace of the students that want to learn and they want to complete the degrees as quickly as possible, potentially on the job. So again, I've drunken the Kool-Aid, went to Oxford with the Reach folks, and really believe that apprenticeship degrees are the direction that a lot of institutions should be looking at in terms of, how do we cope with a rapid change?
I think you'll get a lot of support that here, Mike. And Yeah, you're completely right. It's what AI is doing is really shortening that feedback loop between education and the workplace in a way that apprenticeships can can work well. I'm gonna start picking on people on the sidebar to come in, and please put your hands up as well. Just building on that point, I want to touch on a point that Josh Laney made right at the beginning um, about the challenge for employers in articulating these new cutting edge skills and knowledge that they need. Um, and I think, I mean, Josh, come in if I'm
Yeah.
misinterpreting, but I think you're saying that this is going to require a slightly different approach to what we've seen before because it's so quick.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mike and Ashwin both, everybody really just, you guys all just nailed exactly the point there. It is both. I appreciated you recognizing that it's somewhat ridiculous for us to think that institutions that move in glacial scale, I mean, it takes them 2 years to create a curriculum, all of that kind of stuff, are going to be able to adapt to stuff that's different tomorrow than it was today and create a curriculum for it. The other side of that, though, is when we tell them we really need them to be employer driven, sorry about that, tell them we really need them to be employer driven and building their curriculum based on the needs of the employer. It's also hard for the employer to be specific and say, hey, this is exactly what I need people to know and be able to do. So it is doubly difficult. And I think Mike just mentioned about, apprenticeship degrees and competency-based education models. In the apprenticeship world, we're all pretty familiar now with the competency-based side on the OJL, right? The things you do on the job. We're all pretty good at measuring the things on the job, not all, mostly pretty good at measuring the things on the job in terms of competencies. We're not good at measuring the academic side, the core content knowledge in a competency model. And that's something that, I'm not going to turn this into a commercial for my project, but that's something that we're going to be working on to expand massively over the next 4 years, is the ability to do the related technical instruction side also in a competency-based approach. And it can be delivered by, regular traditional academic institutions, or it could be delivered by industry associations. I don't care who teaches it. That's not the point. But being able to move fast enough to keep up with it is going to mean that it has to be done in a different way than we've developed curriculum in the past. So, but all three of you guys have already kind of nailed the part about the academic side that the schools can't. I mean, it can't. It's unreasonable to think you're going to do it the old way and we're going to set up a curriculum committee and we're going to evaluate the competencies of it takes years. We can't do it that way. So yeah, I'll shut up. Great comments, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Josh. Any views, any comments to add from the panel on that?
Yeah,
I will just say that one thing that people don't realize is how many major companies have started using apprenticeships. I mean, Harry was, the AFA thing, we saw, Deloitte and companies like that talking. Accenture, 20% of their new hires are intended to be apprenticeships. So, we're working with several companies, including eBay, and they're actually really taking hold in companies that people have heard of. Amazon, Walmart, Lonnie mentioned a little while ago. And so it's not a model that's lost on people. It's just a model that companies need to realize is out there and be incentivized just enough to go down this road. And then it's a virtuous cycle. Like every time I've heard about a well-run apprenticeship program, the companies get very excited about it. And the only thing that, like, Twilio had like an exemplary program, but then in the tech retrenchment, they lost 20% of their workforce, and the apprenticeship program, as great as it was, had to go away because they just weren't in a capacity place to do that. And that's where we are with tech in a lot of ways right now. But I've lived in Silicon Valley through a few downturns, and I've watched the upturn, and I'm highly optimistic that this AI revolution is actually going to be a huge economic driver for this country, as opposed to pulling us back, as long as we have the guardrails and an educated population.
Brilliant. Thanks, Rick. And if anyone's got any experiences they want to share about doing that work directly, how you're developing that new curriculum, then please do make a comment or ask a question. Cool. I'm gonna pick up another few questions in the sidebar. We have one from Caroline here. Will the education include understanding the data sets the models trained on? I guess, yeah, there's a question about, well, come in if I'm misinterpreting this, but I guess there's a question here about, the direct use of AI, in education, about using it to supplement that education. Are there risks here we need to think about?
I can take that. See, the last question, it's a good question. I'll tell you why it looks important that we should learn about the data set that these models are trained on. But it's going to soon be irrelevant, because we are done with the data that we are training the models on. What we are doing now is creating synthetic data to train the model. So the more we go, it's all going to be synthetic data, not relevant. So these models wants to get better. They are now into self-learning and self-adaptation mode and self-progressing mode. For that, they need new data, and they're creating synthetic data for it. So we can't keep up with the data set. So the phase that we should know the data set, I think that's gone now. So we don't know a result is coming from an actual data or a synthetic data, actually. So I think it is not required.
I mean, I think the other thing to look at is just basic understanding and competency around what a large language model is and isn't. I think there were some headlines made today around judges being upset that the lawyers are citing cases that don't exist. And so it's clear that folks are using AI in ways that the attorneys apparently don't quite understand that hallucinations are still a thing, and that all of this work, we, as much as we say this often, requires human in the loop and requires someone to validate that this is accurate information. So some some of that basic awareness is not there, because we're all sort of learning this at the same time. This isn't something that we're teaching, in kindergarten as like fundamental knowledge and moving it through all of the levels of education. And so I do think there's going to be this real massive need for folks to just have the basic literacy around what AI is and isn't, right? It is not thinking on its own in most cases. When we talk about having thinking models, it doesn't think the same way we think. And so again, I think some of that broad just understanding and competency around what AI is and isn't is going to be really important for folks to just then be able to rewire their own brain to think about best use cases and where you might need to be much more careful in its application. So
that's a great point, Mike. There's, it speaks to what we were talking about occupations earlier, right? There's going to be a need for the vast majority of occupations to have some kind of AI literacy competency. I'm going to bring in Jeannie, who's got her hand up, and then we've probably got time for one or two more questions. But Jeannie, over to you.
Thank you. My name is Jeannie Kim, and I'm the president at Santiago Canyon College, which is a community college in Orange, California, in Southern California. I wanted to sort of make a comment about the curriculum piece. Absolutely, Mike and others who made comment that we are very slow in terms of making changes to our curriculum, and it is definitely too slow right now for the current times. But I would encourage everybody on this call to work with the community colleges, and particularly with those colleges like ours that have non-credit programs that are focused on workforce development and retraining and upskilling. We are able to turn curriculum or workshops around in those spaces far faster, within a 2-month, 3-month, 4-month kind of a time frame. And the colleges can be also encouraged to create, new curriculum that can be tested that doesn't have to go through a 2-year cycle. So the more that we're able to work together across industries, and those of you who are already have these partnerships in these apprenticeship spaces, especially the non-traditional spaces, and that we're able to do this in partnership with community colleges or educational institutions that are willing to be able to put these things forward, the better it's going to be for all of the students. Because going back to the earlier point that was being made by Mike, that we're not doing this in the actual curriculum right now, starting in elementary school or very early on. And so everybody's just catching on where they can and when they can. The problem is that we still have a digital divide in this country. We still have digital access issues across the board, and people are coming to this at different levels. And just as a reminder that the Pew report that just came out about workforce, the fastest growing population right now that are going back into the workforce are our 75-year-olds and older. And we need to do something that's going to help it in that arena, even as we are talking about the apprenticeship. I'm thinking about what those older individuals may be able to provide in terms of mentorships to our younger people in some of these different spaces. So maybe if we could start reimagining these things, we can solve a number of problems simultaneously.
Thanks, Jeannie. And that's a great point. And you guys are at the cutting edge of apprenticeships as a community college. I think we've got time for one final question, which is coming from Stuart, which is if large companies might hire 20% of their workforce through the apprenticeship model, would they then no longer want to hire people with prestigious degrees? Any views on that?
I guess I'll start with, I do not subscribe to the either or, that it is either prestigious college degree first or it's vocational apprenticeship. I believe the middle path is where we should focus the majority of our attention. And I think it will play out that you can have amazing high quality academic rigor, and you can have hands-on work experience, and it can lower the cost of education. And so I think we set these false dichotomies up, and then we sort of spend a lot of time and energy around that versus let's think out of the box. I love partnering with community colleges. Again, I understand that it's the process that's required for academic credit that slows down and creates that 2-year cycle. So that now we're talking about, the chancellor's office and how, there's just the whole structure of higher ed with accreditation currently works. And a lot of the reforms that we're trying at Creating Coding Careers, trying to advocate for, are very doable. These are, if we just think about the apprenticeship degree pattern, it'll shake out. And by the way, many of the most prestigious schools have co-op programs. They have interest in apprenticeship degrees, right? And they are the ones that are usually the first to adopt some of these very novel, because they have the resources to try it and pilot these novel things. So I think you'll see some really prestigious schools, the Stanfords, the MITs, the Cornells, that will adopt apprenticeship degrees. Undoubtedly, you will see that.
I will add to that. See, for me, Accenture is doing really good in apprenticeship, especially their Midwest divisions. So this is not a reflection on Accenture. So I have been on a talent advisory for many firms. Anytime somebody says I'm going to hire people without a degree, it has always been a cost point. They just want to hire people on a lower bandwidth, right? So that has always been the case. I haven't seen a single employer. It's always behind the scene. Outside, they might have a different one coming and telling that, oh, we are going to do this noble cause and hire no degree for so-and-so thing and pay the exact same wage as of. That has never happened. I haven't seen it. It's always been a cost point. I'm not telling that's what Accenture is doing, but that has been my experience so far dealing on this topic.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys. Great points. You've hit the nail on the head there. There's no dichotomy. We're at time, so I'm going to close this out. So Ashwin, Mike, Rick, thanks so much for your time and sharing your expertise. I think that was a great conversation. We'll share the recording round. If anyone else has any other thoughts, feedback, we talked a bit about some of the important things we want to suggest to DOL and the administration. If anyone has other thoughts, please get in touch. Just to quickly flag a few more upcoming events. We actually have another webinar on AI tomorrow. It's a hot topic. On this one, we'll be hearing from apprenticeship practitioners about how they're integrating AI skills into their programs. Then back to the executive orders, we've got one final session gathering feedback next week on the 12th. This is going to cover the role of states in apprenticeship expansion, the impact on state agencies, what we need to think about there. After that, we're going to pull together all of these conversations, develop a document to go back to the administration and Congress with. We put in a last session on the 26th for AFA members where we'll go through that feedback before it's sent. So please sign up for that. Otherwise, we'll hang around for 15 minutes after this conversation if anyone wants to continue. But yeah, thank you everyone for coming and joining the conversation.
Thank you, everyone.